And I am here now with Timothy Zahn, writer of numerous books, including at least 6 for the Star Wars. 8, starting with the Thrawn trilogy, which has to be probably one of the best trilogies ever written, as far as I'm concerned, and the spark that set off a whole new generation of extended universe and Star Wars fandom. Tim, thanks for joining us. First of all, how did you get selected for being the writer of this new trilogy?
This was one of those out-of-the-blue things. Back in 1988, Lou Aronica, who was head of Bantam Spectra at the time, wrote a letter to George Lucas suggesting that since Lucasfilm didn't seem to be doing anything more with Star Wars, that Bantam would like to pick up the series with a 3-book saga, picking up after Return of the Jedi, where no one had been allowed to write before. All the other books had been prequels or novelizations and such. A year later, Lucasfilm found the letter in a stack of unanswered correspondence. They discussed it, I guess, with George, and decided to go ahead with the project. They contacted Lou and told him to get an author for them, and they would talk contract. So the Bantam editors got together, made up a short list of authors in their stable they thought could handle Star Wars, and sent it out to Lucasfilm with samples of our writing. And the people at Lucasfilm decided my style fit Star Wars best of the ones they'd been given, and I got an early November '89 4 p.m., I think, Monday afternoon phone call from my agent.
Yes, folks, he does remember the exact time. That proves that he is one of us. He is a true fan.
Yes. Well, it was sort of a traumatic moment in my career as well, if you can imagine that. Russ's actual words were, Tim, we have a very interesting offer here. So we discussed it.
The understatement of the decade.
We thought that, yeah, at the time. He and I discussed it. I'll get to that in a minute. We discussed it for 45 minutes or an hour, and then I went off and panicked for about a day. And the next day, I had enough story in mind. I thought that I can get a 3-book saga, a 300,000-word saga out of this. And so I went ahead and accepted the project. It seems obvious now that, of course, Star Wars is going to be a big hit. But back in 1989 and in 1991, when the book was published, that was not a given. Bantam's sales force had been sent out with instructions to get. They wanted enough pre-orders to print 100,000 copies of the book. The orders were low enough; they only printed 70,000 copies. If you think about it, Star Wars' last movie was '83. This is 8 years later. And no one had any idea whether Star Wars fandom even existed out there, let alone whether they would shell out money, good money for a hardcover book. Mm-hmm. You say I sparked it, the revival of Star Wars. Actually, the better image is that I got to be the one to stick the fork in the pie crust and show how much steam there was underneath. The reason Star Wars fandom had been quiet for all those years was there was nothing for them to glom onto. And with Air, suddenly they had something else, Star Wars, and they cleaned out those 70,000 copies in the first week. I think we eventually went to 14 or 15 printings of that hardcover, maybe more. And the extraordinary thing is, when the paperback came out a year later, they were still producing hardcovers. They did for about, 3 to 5 years before they finally stopped printing hardcovers, because there was still a demand for hardcovers of the book.
Yeah.
And my agents told me that never happens. When the paperback comes out, they stop printing the hardcover.
Yeah,
this was extraordinary.
Yeah, that's astonishing. Now, you said you've written 8 books for Star Wars. I can count off the top of my head 7 of them, including the Thrawn trilogy, the Hand of Thrawn duology, and then Outbound Flight, and then one that I've actually found out this weekend, Alliances.
No, Allegiance.
Allegiance. Excuse me, I apologize. What was the 8th?
The 8th one, actually the 7th, 6th written is Survivor's Quest.
Oh, okay.
That actually forms kind of a duology with Outbound Flight. The genesis of that one was that Del Rey asked me to do a book a Luke and Mara book. They were just contracted a Han and Leia book called Tatooine Ghost. They thought a Luke Mara book would be good, so they set it for asked me to do that, and I said I contracted for it, and Survivor's Quest was the outcome. Meanwhile, they also wanted me to do Outbound Flight, but for various publishing reasons and decisions, the way it was going to work was Outbound Flight was going to come after Survivor's Quest. So I thought, okay, well, prequels seem to be all the rage in Star Wars these days. Let's see if I can do it as well. So Survivor's Quest is kind of the end of the Outbound Flight story. It's Luke and Mara and some of the Chiss locating the remnants of the Outbound Flight ship in the middle of Chiss space. Actually, a star cluster in Chiss space. And the question was, how did it get there? There are various clues given, and they're never answered. And I know some reviewers or fans thought, okay, Zahn just ran out of steam and lost interest, and so he never tied up these plot threads. No, they were all going to be answered when you saw how Outbound Flight started in that book. So you will you get the answers to the certain questions in Survivor's Quest, and then you find out where they started in Outbound Flight. So they form kind of a duology in reverse order, 50 years apart.
Oh, that is actually a fascinating concept. Are there any future Star Wars projects on your plate right now, or possibly?
They have not contacted me about any more Star Wars books. They seem very happy with the authors they have doing their current projects, so I don't know if they'll get back to me or not. 8 books, probably a dozen short stories or more. I figure I've done over 1 million words in the Star Wars universe, so I've had my say. I've made my imprint. If I never do any more, for whatever reason, I've had a really good run, and it's been an enjoyable flight in the Star Wars universe.
It has. I actually have one last question. Understanding that there are politics in publishing as in everything, so if you can't answer this, that's fine. But if you could do any particular project in Star Wars, what would you like to do, if you could?
Mm-hmm. The book I will pitch, if they ask me to do another one, will be a sequel to Allegiance. For those who haven't read Allegiance, there are 5. It's set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, so classic Star Wars era. And one group of main protagonists is a group of 5 stormtroopers who have become disillusioned after the destruction of Alderaan, and for various reasons, more or less not of their own making, have been kind of forced to flee the Empire, the Imperial command. They've gotten their own ship, and they've had to basically desert, and wind up being sort of a Robin Hood sort of group, where they're wind up helping people, not really intending to. They're just trying to get out of this area. But they wind up doing good in various ways, and they run into the young Mara Jade, who is the Emperor's hand at this point. It's an interesting story, but I would like to pick up their story. They call themselves the Hand of Judgment, the 5 of them. And I would like to pick up something of their story, linking it a little bit with Survivor's Quest, which comes 20 years or so afterwards. So I've got that, and there are a couple other books I would also pitch. So I've got 2 or 3 other books I would do if they ask me to.
Okay. Well, Tim, thank you very much for the interview. Obviously, you're probably a bigger Star Wars fan than I am, and thank you for the books. I mean, they are fantastic. Thank you for help rekindle, rather than spark, rekindle the flame that was already there, and we greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you all for reading.
Well, what more can be said? I had a great time this weekend, got a lot of great interviews, and just had a blast. I want to give a special thanks to Shar and Randy McKay, the SpoCon guest liaisons, for bending over backwards to set up the guest interviews. And shouts out to the rest of the SpoCon crew for putting together such a bodacious convention. I hope to see you all again next year. Until next time, this is JC saying, take us home, Tim.
This is Timothy Zahn reminding you to get your geek on at Pacific Fen Spotlight.
I scream and shout so you can hear. I tell you that the end is near. I still can't stand, I still can't think. You win me with my favorite drink. Give me that glass, though I feel asinine. If I can't grump, I'll drink plum wine.